Today we welcome Mickey McManus, who's a research fellow at Autodesk. He's also a principal and a founder?
Chairman
Chairman at Maya Design, which is a design consultancy spin out of Carnegie Mellon. And Mickey's done a number of really interesting things. One of his achievements at Maya was to create the Luma Institute, which is a human-centered design and innovation sort of educational program. He also did this really interesting project a couple of years ago at South by Southwest, where they set up a robotic vending machine. And attendees would come in and design and print and eat Oreo cookies Oreos that had Twitter messages, sort of trending Twitter messages.
Eat the tweets.
And you eat
maybe, yeah, that's right.
Mickey's also co-author of a book called Trillions, where he talks about the sort of convergence of machine learning, Internet of Things, and digital manufacturing. And I think his talk today is going to build on those themes. So,
you bet. Thank you. So thanks for having me. This will probably be like a high-speed, wide and deep journey. So strap yourselves in. And if you feel like you know what I'm going to show next, just hold on. I'm going to just have a little bit of fun explaining my current research. At this very moment, I wrote a book a while back that I'll talk about first to give you a little context that I'm writing a sequel right now and I'm doing some experiments. That Oreo vending machine was actually the first experiment that gave me the idea for the next book. And I think fundamentally the nature of things is changing. And the nature of places is changing. And I mean that at a very fundamental level. And what does it mean to design? And what are the new mindsets and tool sets and team sets and skill sets we're going to need when the very nature of things changes? And so that's what I want to talk to you about. What happens when things wake up? So that'll be the topic. I'm an industrial designer. I went to school at University of Illinois in Chicago. That's like the poor kids inner city campus right in the heart of Chicago. And I fell in love with design. And I'm going to be a designer till the day I die. And I love it. And it's helped me grow my brain in wonderful ways. And I mostly fall on my face. And what I've learned is other people pick me up. And it's a really great experience when you start to trust that. So in 2001, I joined a place called Maya. And Maya is interesting in that it was, we shamelessly stole a phrase from a famous industrial designer named Raymond Loewy. And he said, if you could find the most advanced technology, yet acceptable for normal people, you would reach the Maya zone. Most advanced, yet acceptable. And that's the sweet spot. And so we shamelessly stole that. He's dead. And we started a company in 1989 called Maya. It came out of Carnegie Mellon. It was three people from Carnegie Mellon, a cognitive psychologist, a computer scientist, and the person who built the design program over a few decades at Carnegie Mellon. And they thought all the interesting stuff was happening between disciplines, where the real hard space was. And so they built an interdisciplinary team, and we just had our 27th anniversary or something like that. So it's been a fun ride. One of our founders went back and became the dean of computer science and started this thing called the Human-Computer Interaction Institute and the Robotics Institute and some other things. And he always had the vision at the beginning was Maya was two parts. One was going to be prove it in the market. So don't just be an academic lab. And one was going to be an academic lab and please push the very boundaries of what it means to interact with computation. So Maya's whole mission when we started was taming complexity. We thought complexity was power. Complexity is an amazing thing. It is interchangeable with power. It helps me see further. It helps me reach further. But if we can't tame it, if we can't make it feel like a superpower for us, we have failed. So our mission is taming complexity. And a few years back, we fund research internally, and we do a lot of research. And we wrote a book about all of our research over about 20 years. And it was called Trillions. And I was one of the co-authors with the other two owners of Maya. And it was really about, this is what's coming, the connected world, where we are fast approaching maybe a sea of information devices, trillions of things. And I thought this was it. I was pretty excited, and I'll tell you a little bit about it, and then I'll jump into what the new book is going to be about. So Trillions was sort of an observation that over the last 100 years, we climbed a mountain of complexity and power, starting with computing. And if anybody remembers the beginning of this climb up this mountain, In 1900, computing was a career. You could get a job as a computer. You tabulated numbers. And it was a great career. And then in the 1930s and 40s, we were fighting a world war, and computers were like the size of buildings, and they were called things like Colossus. And they were named after human computers, the career. But they were called electronic computers. And we had like IBM's head, the chairman, said that in the 1950s he envisioned at least a market for 5 computers in the world. He was pretty bullish. He thought maybe every big city might have a computer. Electronic computer, not those people. And then we got to this point where we had, today, 8 billion supercomputers in your pocket. 8 billion. We climbed this mountain of computing to the point where you can swipe your finger across a piece of glass and talk to somebody on the other side of the planet, even if that really pisses Don off that they're swiping fingers across glass. We got to this point where you could type 140 characters and foment a revolution. It's kind of like, yay team. Like, we did a lot to get here. Yay humanity. This is kind of a stunning climb. I'd like to call that PC peak. That's our current mountain of complexity. PCs, whether it's personal computer on your desktop or in your pocket. Here's an example of the stuff that happened in that climb up the mountain. You know, from the fax machine in the 20s to the transistor to cellular in the 30s to theory of information, Claude Shannon, yay team, we finally had a theory of information. To Unix 1969, most of your cell phones have some flavor of that. To C 72. All this stuff developed when information was expensive, computing was expensive, networking was expensive, and we never really thought we'd have 8 billion PCs. That was a really big number. How many people can tell me which company, I just picked one company's inventions, which company invented these? I mean, it powers basically all of Silicon Valley today.
Intel.
IBM, Intel, Bell Labs. So one company kind of helped us with Silicon Valley, even though they were on the East Coast. But Bell begat Fairchild, which begat Intel, which begat a whole bunch of other fun things. So we climbed this mountain of complexity. We did a lot of work. We're here. It's pretty exciting. 8 to 10 billion. That means more computers than people, by the way. I just recently read that there are more cell phones in India than there are indoor plumbing, more than toilets. So, okay, yay team. But if you ever climb a mountain, one of the fun things that happens in mountain climbing is you get to the top, and you're like, crap. There's a really big peak over there. I didn't see it because of the first mountain. Like, you think you've gotten there, and it turns out that there's another peak and it's higher. And I think that's what's happened. We have climbed this mountain, 8 billion computers, and we have realized that there is a much bigger mountain coming. And most analysts agree that less than 5 years from now, we will have 1 trillion computational devices in the wild. So this is really hard for me to think about, right? And I'm not really mathy. My math teacher sister would be pissed off that I said that. But I asked around, how do you understand big numbers? Is 1 billion the same as 1 trillion? You just change the words? Is it pretty much, if we did it in the 1960s and we're doing it on the cloud today, it's just the same? That was a good question. So I said, how do you understand trillions? So I want everyone to do this. Think back in seconds. How far back is, I'll start with something easy, 1 million seconds from right now? How far back is 1 million seconds? So when you have an answer, raise your hand. And I don't care if it's right or wrong. This is a game of just bad approximation. How far back is 1 million seconds from right now? Do not shout it out. That will piss me off. All right. 1 million seconds. 1 million seconds. Come on. I need some students' hands up. 1 million seconds. I'm not even going on with this talk. You got to take a guess. If you're as right as me, you'll be in bad shape. Okay. All right. I want to hear, how far back is 1 million seconds?
10 days.
Yeah, it's like 10 days. It's not that bad, right? So how far back is 1 million seconds? It's like a week and a half ago or something like that. I don't know. It's not so bad. Cool. Okay. Now you're ready. How far back is 1 billion seconds? So I want you to raise your hand when you have an idea. And I don't care what the answer is, but how far back is 1 billion seconds? Need some new people. Come on. Come on. You don't have a guess? No guess at all? Okay, give me one.
100 days.
100 days. Pretty good guess. Who thinks he's pretty close? Pretty close? Who's got a different assertion? Wait. Oh, I'm not going to call on you. Wait, there was one over here. No? Not very confident in your predictions. 1 billion seconds. Somebody new. All right.
5 to 10 years.
5 to 10 years maybe. So how far back, asked the computer, how far back is a billion seconds? This was good. I totally got this wrong. It was the 1980s. So this was around the time we agreed on the 8-bit byte. That was a de facto standard because Intel won the war. There were actually 4-bit bytes and other kinds of things, but we won that. So, okay, now you're ready though. So it's like a week and a half, the late 1980s or whatever. How far back is a trillion seconds? So now we got ranging. This should be pretty easy. I want hands up that have not risen their hands before. Risen. I don't even know if that's a word. How far back is a trillion seconds? Just give me a guess. Oh, wait, do you have one?
1,000 years?
1,000 years? What's yours?
30,000.
Huh?
30,000.
30,000. Big difference there. So when I did the guess, because I'm not very good with sort of approximation, I thought the 1500s. I thought I was being pretty bold. And it's not the 1500s, it's not 180, it's not 10,000 BC, it's 30,000 years ago, yeah. Somebody learned how to move a decimal point, that's great. I did not know that. So we were living in caves right about then. And if you look back in the history of evolution, we were domesticating dogs. We were starting that coevolution. Maybe because we were kicked out of the cave by our husband or wife, we don't know, we might have been just sent to the doghouse. But that was a trillion seconds ago. Most analysts agree we're going to have a trillion connected, or actually just at least a trillion computational devices in the next 5 years. So every one of you is going to spend your whole life in this sea of information devices. And this is a done deal. Moore's law is guaranteeing that those will be out here. And in fact, in 2010, we made 10 billion microprocessors, and we made more transistors than grains of rice in 1 year. So this is happening. Now, I thought that was bad enough. And if you think of it, in this era, we think of information in the computer. You look into the computer, you see a desktop. You look into it, and you see folders. You look under your phone, you see apps. Information is in the computer. But a fundamental change is going to happen when the supersaturated solution of computation, all these trillions of devices, get hit with this other seed called connectivity. Moore's law meets Metcalfe's law. That's going to be really weird, because it's going to turn the sock inside out to you, me, everyone living in a sea of information. So I'm not talking about $1 trillion $1 bills. In America, that's like our budget or our deficit or something, and you get a few $1 trillion together, you worry about balancing your bank account. It's not $1 trillion $1 bills though. It's 1 trillion things that have opinions. It's 1 trillion things sending 1 billion messages. It's 1 trillion things turning into a brick because somebody pushed a bad update. It's 1 trillion things with malicious intent. This is an era of unbounded, malignant complexity. That's what the history books are going to call the real information age, not the foothill we just climbed. Unbounded, malignant complexity. Now, maybe I'm being too bold by saying malignant. That sounds kind of like I'm making some assertions here. How many people heard about the Internet of Things device that was taught to lie whenever it was tested environmentally? So whenever it found itself being accelerated at just the right rate for an environmental test and braked at just the right rate, it turned on a different piece of code to lie about its diesel Volkswagen, yeah. So one of the best brands in the world decided they could put a little bit of malicious code so they could make a little more buck. And that's one of the most trusted brands in the world, and they're now settling the biggest settlement in the history of the automotive world, because they basically hid a little of malicious code. Here's 2 other fun examples. You can download this from Hackaday. One of my teammates actually helped build Hackaday. He showed me this one. You can download this. You can get a circuit board, a USB thing, glue it all together, shove it into a whiteboard marker, and then shove it into any Holiday Inn room lock in America and break in and steal stuff. And in fact, thieves were caught in Arizona doing this. They were just shoving it in, opening the door, things like that. That's a pacemaker that a hacker showed off at a convention, taking over from 100 feet away wirelessly, injecting malicious code to push out a 900-volt lethal electrical event, and turned into an infection vector. So if you walked into a hospital and other people had this is a pacemaker that's in your probably parents' or grandparents' bodies today. It infected them too. So that was fun. How many people heard about a month ago that hackers took over a zombie army of IP cameras and Hewlett-Packard printers and wireless speakers and turned them into a zombie army to do the biggest denial of service attack in the planet? Now that was a month ago. You guys might have heard about what happened a week ago. A month ago was the first attack. And that was a little test. They attacked some Minecraft servers in Europe and a big cyber watchdog group. If you're curious, here are the usernames and passwords if you'd like to do it yourself. Root, Dreambox, root, whatever. So somebody clever said, wow, we've got this malignant group of fun things that we can turn into a zombie army. And they sent out 1.2 terabytes a second attack because we put the most complex thing on the planet, a Linux computer, inside of a speaker. Because we don't actually design for complexity. Wall Street Journal said, here's your secret. These are the devices that could be at risk. Just disconnect your house from the internet. So that was their solution. Okay, so the funny thing is in the book, we put that all in chapter 3. We wanted to have like this pity party chapter. It was like cry yourself to sleep, drink hemlock, woe is me. But the point of it was sort of scared straight. Tomorrow morning I want you to wake up, take an axe to your house, light it on fire and run outside because it is a big world out there. Anything multiplied by 1 trillion turns out to be an interesting economic thing and an interesting opportunity for us to do things. Just as the zombie army might be bad, there might be some really cool things we could do. So a wise person said to me, if you ever need to do something really hard, do not invent. That's really hard. Go find somebody who's done something like what you're doing and try to learn. So I couldn't find someone, but I could find some things. In fact, I found nature. Nature's actually been playing this weird game of ultra-complex connected systems for 3 billion years, at least here on Earth. Nature's been playing for longer. Life's been doing it for at least 3 billion years. So chapter 4 is actually all about nature. If you think about your body is an interesting complex information system. You go 80, 90, 100 years without a catastrophic failure. Your body's got this trick. Your body's made of atoms. The atoms get together and make molecules. Those molecules get together and they make cells. And those cells get together and make organs. And those organs get together and they make systems. If we're lucky, they make me. And if I'm really lucky, I convince somebody else to make us. And then we build a community. And that is a design pattern called semantic layering. Layered complexity. Stable plateaus of meta-ness. Atoms have no idea how they're used as cells. Cells have no idea how they're used as organs, etc. So there are stable plateaus that allow for evolution at different meta levels. This is a powerful design pattern we almost never employ in computational design. We build big monolithic structures that are incredibly brittle, and we pray. Now, somebody told me that it's called plug and pray. That's mostly what computer designers do today. So that's one pattern. It's called layered semantics. Very powerful design pattern. If you don't know it, you need to learn it. Here's another one. How many people have met Pando? Pando? Anybody know Pando? You know what I'm talking about? Nobody? Not one person in this whole room? Pando.
Like they're all like the same tree, right? And you just like gave it a name?
It's actually one tree, yeah.
Yeah.
It covers hundreds of acres in Utah. When one leaf changes, actually all the leaves and all the trees change at the same time because it's actually one tree. And what it does, Pando is a 75,000-year-old organism. It's the oldest living organism on Earth, and you guys aren't even celebrating its birthday. And that's kind of mean, I think. So think of this. You should go visit Pando. It's a stand of quaking aspen, and the way quaking aspen propagate is they actually shoot a shoot out, and then they shoot up another tree. But Pando could not have survived all by himself. It turns out they've actually tried taking rotorotors and dragging them through 4 feet of soil in quaking aspens. They can't kill them. So this is 75,000 years. It's been through a lot. It turns out just below the surface is a mycorrhizal network. It's exploiting something called mutualism, which is it's another design pattern. It's a kind of symbiosis, but most people think of parasitism. In business, it's good for me, not so good for you. Or commensalism, it's good for me, doesn't hurt you. But mutualism it's good for both of us. So what happens is this mycorrhizal network, it's a fungal horizontal network, that's the word, digs deep in the soil, releases nitrogen that Pando couldn't get. It actually takes carbon atoms from dying oak and migrates them. It's the internet of plants, basically. Migrates those atoms over. It confers resistance against disease. If you inject a mycorrhizal network into a stand of trees, they actually get healthier. It is the social network of plants. And it's kind of stunning because it's a heterogeneous social network that not only moves information, it moves atoms. It moves water from areas of abundance to areas of drought. Another great pattern, mutualism. If you're not part of the flow of that carbon cycle, then you're standing on the outside looking in. And you're not learning much, and you're also not helping each other. So yeah, I mentioned that not a lot of room actually is on the top of this old mountain. The mountain of the web, the mountain of the cloud that's really client-server from the 50s, the mountain of relational databases that are incredibly limited because we designed all those when we didn't think memory was cheap, networking was cheap, et cetera. Let me remind you, the human body has 50 trillion cells. You have 50 trillion cells in your body. If you cut yourself, like your leg, and hopefully you're not going to cut yourself. But if you do, it does not call the cloud up here and say, can I fix it? It calls all its buddies who all have a copy of you, because memory is so cheap in nature, it's in the form of DNA, and it's mostly peer-to-peer. That's a pattern in nature that's really powerful. So, not a lot of room here. MySpace dies, Facebook wins. We're fighting over the last few inches of that mountain. A lot of room over there. Massive, massive opportunities. Entire industries are going to collapse overnight. Others are going to be born. That's just the scale. So there are a lot of steps there. That was the first book. And we explore a lot of the science we did around biomimicry for information systems and design patterns. A lot of other design things in here. But ultimately, we think vast business opportunities. That's what we wanted to teach. And we said, 2 people walk into Las Vegas. That's my non sequitur of the moment. And they both walk out with more money. And they're not the bank. How do they do that? How could you walk into Las Vegas, like into a casino, and walk out with more money? Anybody have any ideas? Walk in with $1, walk out with 100.
Hawk something.
You could sell something. That happens a lot later in the night. You could borrow something. Yeah. What else? How could you walk in and make money and come out? Well, you could just pull the jackpot lever and get lucky. You know, there is that chance, although the house always seems to win. You could also become a card counter. You could learn math and science. It's not maybe even illegal in many casinos. You'll just get your legs broken. So we decided to write the book to basically say we want to teach card counters what must be true in an era of unbounded malignant complexity. Because we don't think luck is a great plan. We don't think that's a great idea. So, you know, Instagram, 10 people, they know some guy named Zuckerberg, and then, you know, they sell for $1 billion. Kodak, meanwhile, invents photography and dies of bankruptcy. We can't help lucky people, but we could actually teach you things, and it's not against the law to be smart in business, and that's what this book was. Curiously enough, just last year, McKinsey agreed. McKinsey said that probably by the year 2025, just the Internet of Things part of trillions, which is a very small part, because I hope there are still people and places and other stuff. And God knows we shouldn't put everything on the internet. That would be a single point of failure. But they may be connected. Just the Internet of Things part is going to contribute between $3 and $11 trillion to global GDP every year. Just by capturing that exhaust data pouring on the ground. Just by turning that into an information carbon cycle so that we can optimize things. So, okay, that was my intro. And Carl Sagan said, if you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, first you have to invent the universe. And I always love that because it forces you to say, in a different world, you're going to have a different mindset. And you really have to step back and think about it. And so I thought this was the big deal. The Internet of Things, world saturated computing is a big enough trend. I could like just spend some time walking around, you know, talking about the book. I'd be relaxing in some island somewhere at some point. Turns out that never works out if you're a designer. I go to Mayo Clinic and they go, that's amazing, what does this mean to medical stuff, to like humans? I go to Madison Avenue, who mostly pays for Google salaries, right? And they say, what does this mean to Madison Avenue in marketing? And then I go to a very big automotive manufacturer and they say, what does this mean to manufacturing? And my best answer was, I have no idea. And that's why I decided to start doing some experiments. And I thought this one trend was enough, a sea of information devices. But I got a chance to do a silly experiment. Maybe not as sweet as an apple pie, but with Oreo and with Twitter, who decided they wanted to fund a little 6-week experiment into machine learning, the Internet of Things, and digital manufacturing. 3 big megatrends that are not independent. And it actually gave me the idea for a very different experiment. But this first experiment was a 6-week experiment in trending vending. And so I have a little video, which is silly, but I want you to see it, and then I'll explain what's happening. Because it'd be easy to dismiss it.
South by Southwest Interactive in Austin, Texas. We invited festival goers to the Trending Vending Lounge to participate in an experiment. What would happen if your Oreo cookie joins the social network?
I was paid in Oreos, by the way.
What's trending on Twitter and turns those trends into custom Oreos. Using unique transparent touchscreens, users scroll through a list of trending topics, each related to a particular flavor combination and pattern. advanced algorithms translate the tweets into custom cookies. In all, there are about 10,000 possible combinations. Users can also mash up two trends to further customize the experience. The resulting cookie combines elements of the two original trends. Once the user hits Make Cookie, the real magic happens. Using some repurposed 3D printing technology and a pneumatic pump system, we've enabled festival attendees to watch their custom cookie as it's robotically printed and assembled.
We could do pie charts and bar graphs too. So sometimes the cookies were self-referential to the trend.
The final cookie is dropped into a cup, vended, and is now ready to enjoy.
Historians will be able to carbon date that film by the Google Glass. That was a 6-week experiment to build the first multi-material, food-safe, certified, because Oreo had to certify it as actual Oreo cookies, 3D printing system, 2 nanofactories actually. We built 2 of them so we could do A/B testing. We simulated a year and a week through Wizard of Oz prototyping. This is interesting. This was an experiment in just printing whatever's trending, and the other one was let you tune it. And every time they tuned it, they actually taught us and taught the algorithm. We use Bluefin algorithms out of MIT that they track using machine learning live events on Twitter. Of course, we had to build a quantified snack markup language. You have to do that. And because it's Oreo, you have to really worry about the twist shear strength and the lickability and the adhesion index. We wanted to make sure this worked with various kinds of nanofactories. But what was curious even then was when we first did our experiments, we're talking with the head of innovation at Oreo. They are a big manufacturer, 56 factories. In China, an Oreo is a rolled gold tube filled with green tea filling. $3 billion love brand. You do not screw with this brand. And so the chief marketing officer is there, and we have a shipping container, and we set up a whole bar. We had White Russian. We had lots of milk for dipping, different flavors, and a lot of things that we could do if things went wrong, because it was a live experiment of a year and a week. But what was curious is people started coming up and saying, what if I worked out really hard? Would you vend me a sweeter cookie? Or what if I didn't work out this week? My Fitbit said I missed my workout. Could you volumetrically increase the size of the cookie and put less calories in it? So suddenly the CMOs listening to this and saying, wait a second, healthy, happy calories. Kraft, Mondelez, who owns Oreo, Pepsi, Coca-Cola, 3 companies lowered the cost of calories in the world in the 20th century so we could feed a lot more people. But they didn't discriminate between good and bad calories. So we had the rise, we broke a feedback loop, and we had the rise of diabetes, we had the rise of obesity. What if you could have healthy, happy calories? They own Cadbury, you will still have Cadbury around Wednesday if you have kids. You will still treat yourself to emotional health by treating yourself to a cookie or something like that. But what if we could do this n equals 1? What if we could tune it for each person? So this was interesting. It was a fun experiment, very low cost, 6-week experiment that led to about 45 million media impressions over 9 days, better than their normal averages in consumer packaged goods. And it also led to the growth of a new $150 million new revenue line because the head of factories was in there and the head of packaging was in there. And they were like, wow, I don't have to use the same kind of package if I just send 5 cartridges and algorithmically ship things. Because it's not sitting in a warehouse and not sitting on a shipping container. The second experiment we did for them was designing the packaging itself. So we ran one Facebook ad just before Christmas. We teamed up with 2 big coloring book artists, because I don't know, people like coloring books. And we let people design their own package. Oreo had never shipped a single package in their life to anybody, and they'd never taken a credit card. In the first week, we collected $11,000 in sales. Actually, Maya had to set up the bank account because they didn't have one. for accepting consumer credit cards, because their customer is Walmart, is Whole Foods. And we saw this amazing time when people could use an iPhone and design their own package and send it as a gift with actually personalization. But we had to build a separate factory outside of Minneapolis. We had to work with HP to take entirely different files because they were algorithmically generated and every single package was different. Now we just signed a deal with Alibaba, so it's rolling out in Mandarin in China. And Mondelez has a new target of $1 billion in revenue based on mass customization and direct-to-consumer. And they think of it as a sensor network. If something starts trending in one of the trending vending machines and it catches some amazing trend, they can upskill it up into bigger and bigger factories. So they're now thinking of their factory as a social network. So this was a fun experiment. What I saw was the Internet of Things was a mega trend, but it was also slamming headfirst into digital manufacturing, the boundaries between atoms and bits getting much more fluid, and into machine learning, because all of these things have opinions. And because of computation and sensing and feedback loops, they can actually do things themselves and test out those opinions. So they are waking up. So the three trends are on a collision course. I'm thinking of this as primordial. I think we've reached this point where we have a primordial ooze, a primordial soup, not just a sea of information devices, but it's waiting for a spark. And I think something different is going to happen. So I want to dive into the soup a little bit and talk about things that I think you know about and see if you do, and talk about maybe a different perspective on them. So the Internet of Things, when you think of that, you think of like home appliances. Google bought Nest. Why did Google buy Nest? Why do you think Google bought Nest?
To start getting into the home in different ways.
Yeah.
Acquire
What else?
information from
Huh?
us. Acquire information from us.
Yes, yeah. They got a oil well that's drilled on the wall between your kitchen and living room, and it's just going to drill for oil in terms of humidity and temperature, and is Bobby checking the fridge? They are getting contextual data. And when you sell the house, probably the next person's not going to tear that off. So they're going to get 15 years worth of data that is falling on the ground as exhaust today. But in the real carbon cycle, we know that there is no waste. Your waste is someone else's food. Independent agents jump in and fill in ecological niches. So they are doing an experiment in the information carbon cycle. Why else do you think they bought Nest? I mean, it's expensive to make atoms. Google has a maximalist philosophy. Like, just if I can serve 10,000 people, I can serve 10 million people by adding more servers. Why would I want to worry about mining for oil, drilling, tooling, manufacturing, warehousing, all that stuff with the really complicated, messy, fussy physical world? Why else did they buy Nest? So it's information, data about us, contextual, what else?
It's ecologically good. You can.
It reduces,
Yes,
yeah.
Carbon. I mean,
Carbon, yeah.
You can turn things off appropriately, anticipate activity.
They are providing something interesting. It learns how to do this, and then it starts managing your electric bill, basically. They also have an owned media footprint in your house. They don't have to go through a web browser on your TV for you to talk to them, or your phone. They can talk to you straight from the appliance in your house, right when you walk by. So owned media right in the house. Here's what I think of when I think of Internet of Things. This is exciting and interesting and sexy. It's not really making much money right now. The Amazon Echo is, I think, the most successful Internet of Things device out there because you can order things from Amazon Prime. But here's what I think about it. I want to show a really simple experiment that was done at Carnegie Mellon about the most mundane thing in the world. What if you could have an Internet of Things meets machine learning headlight? It sounds pretty boring. But what happens when the fundamentals change? So let's watch this little video. Might not make too much sense, and then we'll talk about it.
Driving at night during a snowstorm is a nightmare. Snowflakes appear as bright flickering streaks and are very distracting. The problem is mainly caused by light from our own headlights reflecting off the snowflakes back to our eye. The solution to this problem is very simple with our headlight. By avoiding illumination of the snowflakes, in other words,
just don't hit the snowflakes.
The visibility of the snowflakes will be reduced. This might seem like a crazy idea, but preliminary experiments with artificial snow demonstrate that it is technically feasible, while significantly improving visibility with little loss in light. The current prototype is 10 times faster than our previous prototype, with much better performance, bringing this technology closer to reality.
What's stunning about this is it's just a DLP projector and a camera in the middle of the DLP projector watching, and it just puts a black pixel wherever the snowflake is. And because we have fast enough computation, it's getting smarter. It also lights up the other car coming at you, but because it also has some machine vision, machine learning in it, it puts a black pixel right over the driver's eyes. So the driver never sees the headlights. So you never turn on dims and brights. It's always the brightest. And when it's really bad, it just illuminates the path in front of you, and it spotlights the deer walking across. And it really works. They tested it with like 100 cars coming at high speed in a pouring rain, and it worked perfectly. And they had cameras to show you the driver's view and the other person's view. So really simple things are going to radically change the way we design and engineer stuff if we start to think about them as connected and not disconnected and dumb. The age of disconnected and dumb things is just over. I'm not saying they're smart, by the way, but they're just definitely, they're interesting children. I did an experiment because I like cars, and it's always a good idea to do like gap years with things that you like. So I decided, what if I could use another Internet of Things sensor, a reality computing capture system that could rip the physical world and give it to me in the digital world. So I pulled in a car designed by some expert racers that have won Baja 1000 and Pikes Peak championships, and I said, build the best car you could imagine out of chrome moly, engineer it to survive driving over Trona Pinnacles in the Mojave. Then I got some students and I said, what if we could just use sensors, and what if we could just like wire up, looks like I lost the connection here.
It thought it was snowing.
Maybe it's snowing really hard. Let me go back a slide and see if you see something. Oh, look at that, it was PowerPoint dying. We're going to wait till it starts back up again. Remember that whole part about malignant complexity? I'm really afraid to let that checkbox be there, but I'm going to do it. But we, I don't know what's going to happen, guys. Just wait for an explosion. But we ripped reality first, because it used to be it took a long time in computing to like build your model, and then you could do what ifs, but now we can rip reality the same way we rip CDs using structured light. It's asking me to download fonts, which is fun. Don't care about fonts. And then we censored it up with off-the-shelf sensors, and we took it out to the desert and we pounded it to within an inch of its life. What was interesting with this experiment was we used these Internet of Things to actually learn about the vehicle. Even though the vehicle had been designed by the best designers and fabricators in the world, we thought, could we actually lower the cost or the weight of that vehicle by having the Internet of Things sense the vehicle itself? Could the car help design the next version of the car? And I've got PowerPoint back. I'm very excited. Cross your fingers. See if anything happens. I clicked it. Today might not be a good day for PowerPoint. Reality capturing. So these are like lasers and other things capturing. That's a ripped physical space. That's the ripped physical space as a point cloud. That's geometric objects in a cloud platform called Fusion. Let's click the next one and see if it happens. I have a lot of faith. Yeah, there we go. I see a picture. In a weekend, we used National Instruments tools. We wired up a visual thing. We put a bunch of sensors on. A bunch of my teammates were from schools from around the world. We built a wiring loom. We set it up and took it out to the desert, and we pounded it to within an inch of its life. What was interesting about this was we didn't only capture the vehicle, we also captured the driver. Because the driver is a component of the vehicle. So we put emotive sensors on the driver, and we looked for flow states, we looked for anticipation events, we looked for synesthesia between various things, like the audio sound that they heard just before something broke, and we broke these cars a bunch. And one of the things that was neat was we opened it up in a tool, and actually the team came back and said, hey, do you have any tools to open up 4 billion data points? Because that's what we captured in the last hour, 4 billion data points. And we found one tool that you could scrub through live, and you could actually look at the stresses on the vehicle, on the person, and on the different channels. And in fact, when I said on the person, this is what the person scan looked like. You guys are probably pretty familiar with these things. Let me go back one. But this is Mouse, one of the drivers. Yes, the team has a Mickey and a mouse. And he's an award-winning director and stunt car driver. And you could see where he was planning. You could actually see where he was in the event. And we could start looking at it, and we started thinking, what if the car could continually be running almost a video game on the car and unlock features for a driver to actually become more like Mouse faster? because Mouse is a Guinness record-winning racer. So that's what I think of with Internet of Things. But I also think we're not really taking seriously how quickly we're lowering the barrier for more people to play with the Internet of Things. So this is an experiment that came out of DARPA that we did called MakerSwarm, that allowed a 10-year-old to design a 10,000 device app in 10 minutes by being able to almost inspect, like MacGyver, all the devices. So if I could inspect all the devices here, I'd see probably 100 microphones. But I need to be a geek to use those microphones. But what if I could just say, I want to invite you to my swarm and listen? And I want to pump it to Google Voice and listen for, wow, oh my gosh, that's cool. And I want to pump that to a screen on the other side of the country. I don't need infrastructure to do that today. We're in a sea of information devices. It's just only geeks can control them. So what if we could lower the barrier where you could literally inspect? And we got a bunch of kids together and we said, could you inspect, what would you do? And they Post-it noted some things and they started dreaming up some ideas of connected stuff in their toy box. And they started thinking about this. And one of the fun things they came up with, one of them was talking about, well, I've got these little Sphero robot balls. And I've got these drones, sharper image drones. What if I could wire the ball to control the drone? And maybe if I run really fast, it'll go up and someone could shout and go down. So we said, okay, let's try to build that in 5 minutes. And I'll show a video of that.
Let's say I want to do something new. Maybe I want to take this ball and I want to actually control that drone over there. So here's the ball, here's the Sphero, and here's the drone. And I can go in and say things like, well, what if I want to take the yaw, which is like the rotation of the ball, and I want to change it to make it rotate that drone. So I can actually pick up this and pull the wire from yaw, and I can just drag it over to yaw over here. If I let go, it'll automatically go out and tell me what's wrong. Well, there's a range mismatch. And it goes out to the marketplace, and it can find 2 people have already tried to solve that. And I can go search the marketplace, or I can find one. This one says yaw to yaw. I'll just pick yaw to yaw. And it puts in the automatic component that'll actually fix it. So this is taking out 180 degrees, fixing it, and putting it in there. And now I can actually control the drone with the ball. So now when I rotate the ball, it rotates the drone.
Maybe sadly, or more interestingly, in about an hour, we had 10 of those drones being controlled by different balls, and things got a little bad in that conference room. But it was this interesting idea that we're in a sea of information devices, but we've actually limited access to only the geeks, only the hobbyist geeks. And now we have to convince everyone to learn how to code, which sounds like just a horrible thing for our children. It might be neat if they could live their lives. But because we can't solve it from a design standpoint, we do that. And these kids end up finding that they have more power because they're learning about structures and generativity and things like that. If you go to 1, 2, 3D circuits, any 12-year-old can build a circuit, hit a button, and order it. We've lowered the cost of putting complexity into the world to the point where we can send it everywhere. The last time we lowered the cost of putting power and complexity in the world was maybe Edison. This is the very first Pearl Street station. This is where we started electrifying America. And we put this power in every wall of our house that you could shove a fork into and kill yourself, which is pretty cool. Within 15 years of that, though, there was a national building code that said, how do you manage complexity so blue-collar workers can install it and normal humans can do it? Today, 60 years into the computing revolution, we have no national building code for installing complexity. That's weird. One of the examples for this is you'd never put a circuit breaker or a fuse box within a meter of a wall. Does anybody know why? You can't really tell by looking at the circuit breaker or the wall because it's an emergent thing. If you touch the circuit breaker and get electrocuted, you'll bounce off. You'll be thrown, and if you hit a wall, you'll bounce right back in and get electrocuted again. So it sets up a feedback loop. Nobody has flame wars about this. There are no my open source code is better than your open source code. This is the Bible. And it's about managing complexity. We're not having a conversation about this at all. We're 50 years in. So, okay, great. Here's a little more. You can measure things. My friends started Body Media, and with 6 sensors and about 100,000 people, over the course of a few years, they took about $100,000 worth of blood ox and testing equipment, tens of thousands of pounds, and they converted mass into math. And they got it down to $50 and 6 sensors and math, and they were about 90% as accurate as all that $100,000 worth of stuff. And they got FDA approval. They're the gold standard for sensing. Astro went off to do Google X, and Chris runs Luma, my educational institute. But what they discovered was the media pouring off your body, if we didn't treat it like exhaust data, but we actually said, could we sense it, we might be able to start discovering the owner's manual for the human body. And theirs is the first clinically proven one, but of course Andrew Thompson is building stuff out of copper and magnesium, stuff your body needs anyway, and when you swallow it, it uses the acid in your stomach to do a wireless signal to a Band-Aid on your waist, and it's doing telemetry in you. So when we say Internet of Things, these are already in clinical trials as well. Of course, bad things can happen. Johnson & Johnson just got hacked last week. Insulin pumps can deliver enough insulin to kill you from about 100 feet away. And when we think of sensing, we're also, the Internet of Things is letting us do new kinds of neuroscience. And I think I just saw some amazing things in the Arthur C. Clarke lab and some other places where we can actually sense EEG, MRI, and we can actually do things. This is Adam Gazzali's lab, taking 70-year-olds, testing them with a video game around distraction and getting their actual new neurons to form and show that so they have the working memory and distraction level of a 20-year-old now. So new kinds of science because we can sense things. So the Internet of Things is changing a lot. Digital manufacturing, a lot of people know about like 3D printing, but what's really neat is when you start to look at what you can do across the entire product cycle. So imagine I've got a tool and I want to mold something. That's what an industrial designer has to do. You have to industrially produce 100,000 of these things. I can simulate it. I don't need all the experience that I had 50 years ago or 15 years ago. I had to go to a special mold guy. I could use a cloud-based tool. I can simulate it with mold flow. I could actually then say, why don't you build a better structure that has better cooling, and use the computer as an augmentation tool to help me actually manufacture something so that I'm lowering the barrier. So now I could say, what if I actually could use a cloud-based tool? I could peel back what I'm doing with a mold. I could actually put in heating and cooling currents and have it simulate how it could keep it cooler so that the plastic flows better. And then I could go in and actually simulate how I could lightweight this thing so that it cools off much faster. So now I've got a tool that looks very different, and I can start to actually make it so that it'll do things better and build the least amount of structure, and then I can 3D print that and have a tool. Now, when I was a product designer, a tool was $500,000, and it was a capital cost, and that's what limited us. And now you can do things radically differently. And it's actually starting to show some value. This is something from an engine, 5 grams and 823 centimeters squared of cooling. With generative tools, with design tools for additive manufacturing, I can have an internal cooling surface that's massively better. It actually reduces fuel consumption and helps a bunch of other things. And it's not just additive, it's additive and subtractive. This was 3D printed with titanium, and then it was automatically, a tool path was generated to carve and machine the rest of the pieces. So it's hybrid, subtractive and additive coming together. Of course, you can also do things like, say, I want to push a button on the side of a canal in Amsterdam and have 2 robots assemble a bridge that I can walk over. This is some work we're doing with Joris Laarman, where we're looking at human-machine collaboration to do large-scale physical structures. This is kind of fun because robotics are pretty ubiquitous, and we can start to do some fun things with free-form robotics. So digital manufacturing is changing. This is what Joris Laarman is planning. He's still trying to get permission from the city. And of course, we can 3D print organs. There's some really neat stuff happening with safe photopolymers made from chitosan, which is shrimp shells. So that's pretty exciting. And here's a DNA printer. It makes about 1 million strands of DNA a day. And then Lawrence Livermore is experimenting with about 30 new kinds of performance materials that can be manufactured to have characteristics unfound in nature. And last year, Invisalign made 3 million retainers. And every single one of them was unique. They 3D printed 3 million retainers. Every retainer that is made by them is manufactured. If you look at their factory, you could probably eat off of it. This is their factory. But here's the interesting thing. They did not design a product. There was no SKU. There was no stock keeping unit in someone's warehouse. There is no warehouse for these. They designed a species. And they defined what the brand characteristics. It's going to be clear. This is the experience you'll get. And then they said, dentists slide sliders and evolve this one animal in the species so that it tightens as tight as you want, because it hurts if you tighten too tight. And they said, patient, you provide the slider on how many teeth you have in your head. And it was co-created out in the cloud. So effectively what happened is they designed for loss of control and evolution in the wild. That's kind of interesting. Here's an experiment we did with kids. We like to experiment on kids. That sounds horrible. I should just delete that part. But kids don't have the preconceived notions. So this is an enterprise design and manufacturing app that's on an iPad for free. It's called ThingMaker. And you can drag things in. It shows assembly instructions. They're parametric. You can touch on them and rub your finger on them to add textures. They print without any support materials. On most printers, you can click a button and put it in context. You can click another button and it slices it up and shows you how much it'll weigh, how much it'll cost, how long it'll take. This is a tool for 7-year-olds. I don't have that tool as a product designer. But this is what's happening it's now called ThingMaker. Supply chains are radically changing. If we look at something silly like the toy industry again, one more time. Barbie's like a $2 billion industry. And there are maybe 300 grams of plastic in it. So will supply chains stay the same? If you think of this, you can fit about 13,000 Barbies in a shipping container, or if you just ship the polymer, you can ship the equivalent of 250,000. So will we be shipping things all over the world? Or will we mostly be shipping things within a 50-mile radius and only the rarest stuff comes? So what's happening with supply chains? Here's a really bad supply chain. Take your product, put it for a critical mission for pioneers on a nuclear missile, basically, subject it to a Richter 9 earthquake, and you can only send things up that fit in a nose cone and send it to the space station. Or send an email and print a wrench. So Made in Space out of NASA Ames actually shipped this up. There's now one there that's commercial, which means students can do experiments in space if somebody funds them, and so can other people. So supply chains are changing. And lastly, here is a printer that says, what if everyone in the entire planet, 2 billion people with cell phones already had half a 3D printer in their pocket, and the other half cost $99? So this is something called Ono that's actually shipping next week, or 2 weeks, that is going to radically change things because you can basically text somebody a gift. And it'll print. You can obviously set up an entire factory. If an iPad Pro, you could set up multiple units. This one's doing the clear plastic. This is doing the rubber plastic. That was a $250,000 Kickstarter. They got $2 million in 30 days, and they've already started. They showed me a working demonstration. And of course, some of the trends are combining. Here's digital manufacturing and the Internet of Things. This one, $8,000 printer, it stops occasionally and says, hey, could you put in a battery? And then it keeps going. And then it says, could you put in an LED? Could you put in a circuit board? Could you put in a motor? And then at the end it says, hey, could you go grab that remote control over there? Let's go for a flight. And so here are two of those trends coming together. So we're going from dumb materials to computronium. The nature of things is changing. We're going to networked matter. So these are the concepts that we should be teaching engineers, maybe. These are the concepts we might want to learn about design. And I haven't even talked about machine learning. And this is the punchline, the last trend. We're working on collaborating with machine learners as part of our team. They're kind of stupid, but they're kind of really smart and they draw really fast. So what if I could just set my goals? I could say I want this house with LEED certification, energy, height, width, and it generated 1,000 children. And then I could cull that dynamically and be able to explore the genetic space. So this is using machine learning for what we call goal-directed design. Instead of designing it first and then computer-aided documentation, it's I just set my goals and constraints, and form follows forces, whether they're market forces, whether they're material forces. So this is a new project called Dreamcatcher, and I think it's going to fundamentally change the way we design and collaborate. Here is, I can look at it cost by weight. Here's how it slices through all those variables. And I can't really keep those in my head, so it's multi-variable things, and I can click on stuff and actually see how it slices through the trade-offs. We always make trade-offs in design and engineering. It's just that we don't articulate them and we don't even know we're doing those trade-offs. So this allows me to explore many more possibilities in the short distance of time. It's a pretty fascinating thing. We're just starting to roll out little bits and pieces in our research, but machine learning is really changing things. Here's an example of going from 10 kilograms to 2 kilograms by having it evolve. We just said we need a chair that can support so much weight, and it started generating stuff, and we started tuning it and curating it. Remember that car project? We took all the data points and we put it into Dreamcatcher, and we said, could we lower this 460-pound chassis, and could we make it lighter and actually stronger, and or more flexible so it doesn't break catastrophically. And we put that in, and this was done by the students. But what was interesting is it got it down to something like 290 pounds in the first set of iterations. So it carved off more than 100 pounds. And it's uniquely tuned for additive manufacturing. It would be very hard to manufacture it by welding it together, but trivial with a titanium printer. And actually Lockheed Martin and others have 46-inch diameter titanium printers that they're testing for the Orion spaceship. So it carved away all the things. It starts to almost look organic, like a horse's hip, which was shaped by the forces. And we slid a slider and said, what would it look like in titanium? That's what it would look like. What would it look like in chromoly? What would it look like in aluminum? And so we're starting to learn and explore those things. That's machine learning. You also might see machine learning because people have self-driving cars. But I think the important point is whatever's in a self-driving car is in your shoes tomorrow. Right? That's Moore's law. Right? And Metcalfe's law is coming together because they're connected. So here's Qualcomm. You guys are pretty familiar with them. They came up with a chip called the 0th chip. Nobody writes any code for this chip. You just teach it like a child. So when it rolls over a white square, you say good robot. Give it a carrot. When it rolls over other squares, you say bad robot, and you raise it like a child. So here's the first product raised like a child. Now, I'm not great at raising a child. How good are we at teaching designers and engineers how to raise children? Plus, they're going to go off to college and go to that frat party at some point and go off. It's very hard to predict what they'll do. So all of it was done with biologically realistic neural networks, not even connected to the internet. Lastly, on the design, on the machine learning side, is something called design graph. And that's a new experiment we're doing. We think of it as autocomplete for the physical world. So imagine that I raise a child and I want them to know German. I could teach them via Rosetta Stone, where I give them phrases and a vocabulary list, and I try to explain to them what German is, and they will not learn German. I could send them to Germany for about a year, immersed in data, and they will come back knowing German. And we decided the same thing. We have the world's largest data set of physical things on the planet. Facebook has the social graph of your friends. LinkedIn has the social graph of your career. We have the social graph of things. So we actually had our baby machine learning thing start teething. And it started biting things. Like it started going, yeah, I think this is called a cylinder. And then over time it started finding bumpy cylinders and calling them gears. And over time it started noticing these gears are often put together with these gears for this mechanical advantage. And these axles go with these things. And it started building a self-assembling ontology of things. And then we stripped everything out because we really don't want you to see like GE turbine engine parts. We stripped away identity, we stripped away all that stuff, and then we turned it on for your own stuff. So now you start building things and it starts teething automatically and saying, hey, you're starting to draw a bracket, here are the 5 bolts that go with that bracket. Here, you typically use 4mm bolts, but you used a 5mm one here. Was that on purpose? And it starts collaborating with you. This is called design graph, and I'll show you what that looks like. I'm looking at all the cars I've designed. I'm curious about them. I click on a car. Cars are actually mostly made of axles. But they've got some other stuff. I can automatically find part groups. I never named these. It automatically guessed these. It auto-completed gears. These gears often go with these gears. These bolts go with these bolts. I'm curious how something fits in the system. Here's this pipe that's being used. I'd love to see it in context. So what if I could take 10,000 engineers worth of thinking and give it to a 14-year-old? What does that mean to the design approach? So machine learning is here. And it's really interesting as a collaborator. We think it's going to push each other. So everyone probably has heard of AlphaGo. How many people have heard of AlphaGo? Everyone's heard of it, right? The cool story about AlphaGo, though, was that they did reinforcement learning. So they had AlphaGo play against younger versions of itself, just like Serena and Venus kind of playing against each other. And they also had it play against like the 1,000th best player in the world, for real, a human player, and then the 800th, and then the 700th. The 600th was interviewed, 633rd was interviewed in this, and that was interesting. After the #1 player in the world was beat by AlphaGo, the 633rd player said, please be gentle, because you just broke his entire career and his life. The #1 player in the world thought it was going to be a while before computers beat me. When I lost, I went home and had nightmares. And this is number 633 in the world. I defined myself by breaking 1,000, by being in the top 1,000. And then I started having dreams, because AlphaGo went to whole areas that nobody had ever talked about before and started discovering whole landscapes of spaces. So I called Google and I asked if I could join the team. And now, 3 or 4 months later, number 633 in the world is number 300th in the world. So he just flipped over to the other side of the bell curve and was sort of the Venus to the Serena. So I think there's this opportunity for humans and machines to collaborate in wildly new ways. To end this, I think we're shifting from the Industrial Revolution that was largely a static equilibrium. Think of it as like a pendulum swinging. It settles down, that's my business model. It settles down, that's my supply chain. As long as the world doesn't change, I can kind of put it aside. But if there's any kind of a change, it's very brittle because it's static. That's like a dove's wings. Just gliding along, static, very energy efficient. But then a hawk comes to attack the dove, and suddenly it switches to a dynamic equilibrium and it flies away. So I think for the first time in history, we are at this point where we can shift and dynamically trade off these two kinds of equilibriums. The nature of things is changing. And what's neat is we have the three minimum trends for this. If you look at balancing a finger, like balancing a pool cue, which is a dynamic equilibrium, it's not very hard. I mean, it's not very easy to do, but it takes energy, but you can do it in lots of things. That's a dynamic equilibrium. But you need sensing, like your eyes, and you need to look at the right things. So that's the Internet of Things and a feedback loop. You need to be able to change things. You could do a software update or a hardware update to your products and your things by 3D printing them. And you need to be able to learn, and we have machine learning. So we actually have at least some of the basic essentials as megatrends that will allow us to do this trade-off. So I think the nature of things is changing pretty dramatically. And I think we're going to find entirely new value, but it's probably going to be designed for loss of control and co-creation. And it's going to be entirely new places. Now, McKinsey said there are trillions of dollars to be had. They also said in the same report that 40% of that value is going to come from playing nicely together in basically the information ecology. So we're going to have to play in that ecology. I think I'll end there and open it up to questions. Thank you, everybody.